and welcome back to the Boropolis podcast. I am delighted to be joined again with Dom Shaw. And actually, Dom, just to start, before I introduce you, I'm just going to give you a quote that was left the last time that we recorded. I don't know if you've been made aware of this, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Someone commented on the last podcast that we did after the transfer window, when Dom Shaw talks, you listen. So I thought I've got to get you back on and listen to some more, because clearly you're the voice of reason amongst Middlesbrough supporters.
I don't think it was my missus who said that. No, I'd love it if it was, but no. Thanks. Yeah, thanks very much to whoever said that. But no, I'm delighted to be on. I really enjoyed it last time, and always enjoy it. So no, thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
That's no problem. Well, I think just to set the scene, obviously, in terms of the last podcast that we recorded, that was off the back of Southampton. So obviously, since then, we've had the Stoke and Portsmouth games. Of course, included in that was Borough's first defeat of the season. Look, I don't want to kind of go too much in terms of the specific performances, but more so, I guess, in this block of games since the West Brom game, the themes that really have began to unravel. And, by no means is this a disaster. It is literally Borough's first defeat of the season. And I think, interestingly, just as a start point, the quotes actually that I've screenshotted from, I think it was Scott's piece on the Sunday after the Portsmouth game, of Dale Fry basically saying that actually, in a way, it might be a good thing that Borough have suffered their first defeat of the season. Now, I know that sounds something mental to say, given that I'm sure if they could, they would absolutely love to do an invincible season in the Championship. But do you sort of see where he's coming from in that sense? Because I've seen a few comments after the defeat that this has been coming a little bit. The kind of attacking issues, which obviously we'll get onto a little bit later, have been there for a couple of games now. But it might be a good thing that this defeat has come now, rather than potentially, picking up another point and then it rolling on, and then I don't know, maybe it's a heavier defeat occurring later down the line. It was an interesting quote from Dale Fry, I thought.
Yeah, I think I don't think for 1 minute that this would be the case in the head coach's office and when the coaches are obviously having their daily meetings. But I think you can maybe get distracted by the fact that you're unbeaten and you keep drawing games, but there's no defeats, and I think you can almost kind of convince yourself that everything's hunky dory. Now we have seen an awful lot of good stuff from Borough, but a defeat can sharpen minds at times, can't it? And I don't think you don't need to lose for Rob Edwards to know that work needs to be done on the attack. Edwards has been saying that since the first game of the season. After most games this year, hasn't he? He has talked about
Yeah.
how there's still an awful lot to come. There's still an awful lot of improvement to be done. I know we'll get onto it, but we'll just get to it straight away. I think Edwards deserves an immense amount of credit for coming in and tightening Borough up so quickly and so impressively, especially considering what Borough were like last season and how leaky and how, to be frank, shambolic they were defensively at times. I think the way he's come in and made Borough one of the best defences in the Championship absolutely needs applauding. I think you also have to accept that to do that might have to take the hit. Hopefully, well, clearly it needs to be just short term going forward as well as you work to get that balance right. And I think Edwards has been as open as he can about that, even when results have been as good as they have been in the early weeks of the season. Defensively, we're really pleased. We're hard to beat already, but there's still an awful lot to come. And for all that, the last international break we were talking about, it maybe coming at a bad time for Borough. You just wanted to roll on with this momentum. I actually think this has come at a good time, because I think I know few players are aware, but I think it just gives Borough a chance to take stock and Edwards' chance to work with his players on certain areas that clearly need addressing.
Yeah, and I think what you touched on there is something that's really interesting. All of the sort of It's the complete polar opposite of last season, really, because I think at this stage under Michael Carrick last season, and I'm wary that, people don't want to kind of keep going back to that, but the conversation was very much, and even I think the season before, to be honest, very much Boro's underlying numbers are fantastic, and, it's a matter of time before it clicks. And there was certain sections of games where there was the 15, 16 goals in about 3 games. We battered Luton, battered QPR. And I think this season it's very much different because you see Boro looking, as you put it, and the numbers back that up, one of the best defensive sides in the league. But in terms of their XG, in terms of what they're creating, I think they're ranked 23rd, at least amongst some of the worst numbers for XG, depending, I guess, what emphasis you put on that, because I know a lot of people sometimes hate that expression. But this Middlesbrough side, and I think timing is an interesting one. Looking at the Portsmouth game, like what you said, he deserves an enormous amount of credit for getting Middlesbrough into a position where really, if they stay as they are defensively and can even go to a sort of middle of the pack championship team in terms of chance creation, they're going to be right in and amongst it. And as you say, he deserves enormous credit for that defensive stability. I think just touching on Portsmouth, it felt like a little bit, I know we briefly spoke before we started recording, a little bit of a continuation of themes that have kind of been coming over the last few games. And I think the main talking point is that front three, and particularly where where the individuals in the front three are playing, easy for me to say, and also kind of getting the best out of. I know everyone was so excited about it. We spoke at length about David Strella, and I think the fact that he had his instant impact against West Brom, and then Tommy Conway's been shifted a little bit, and the front three's now changed a couple of times in the last few games. It's a really big talking point because I don't think anyone's under any illusion that it was just going to click straight away. But I think what would be fair to say is the current sort of, for what it's been for the most part, which is Tommy Conway playing in sort of a left 10 role, it's not getting the best out of him. And I think it would be fair to say David Strelec is not getting the he needs to be up to speed a little bit more, but we're not seeing the best of him either in that number 9 role either.
No, absolutely not. I thought in the first half against Stoke, when Strelic had the ball, we saw the best of him, really, or certainly the best we've seen of him so far. He dug that shot out, didn't he? A couple of times he did that thing that you can already tell he's going to do well, where he just almost like defenders hang off him and he shrugs them off and he turns and brings other players into play. I thought when he had the ball, Strelic was good against Stoke. He just didn't have enough of the ball, did he? And I wasn't one bit surprised that Edwards chose to freshen it up at Portsmouth. But I was going to say, I think what's clear is Edwards doesn't yet know his best attacking formula, but I think he does. I think he thinks his best three are Nepan, Conway, and Strelic. But like you said there, I don't think we've seen the best of them yet. Conway is not ideally. I think if you said to Tommy Conway, "What are you? What's your best position?" I don't think he'd say the position that he's been playing recently, or certainly had been playing, with that kind of withdrawn attacking role off to the left. And Strelic, when he came in, Edwards said he can play in all three of the attacking roles, either side of the number 10 role or up front. But we haven't seen the very best of him yet either. I think we've seen the flashes to show why Boro are so excited about signing him. But clearly that attacking formula is very much a work in progress. And then I think if you're working further back from there, the Morris and Hackney, I think, have been blunted somewhat in the last couple of weeks, couple of games, and that then puts the onus on the wing backs. And obviously, you didn't have Britton there. I know the system was different against Stoke, but you didn't have Britton there for that game. You had Britton injured at Southampton when he picked up that injury. So
Yeah.
I think defensively, fine, solid. I know Boro conceded at Portsmouth. But there are no reasons for concern in defence, despite the injuries they've had and the fact that Edwards has had to tinker it round. It's clear that the structure's there. Now it's about finding that balance and getting the best formula moving forward. I think in terms of personnel, but then not just personnel, how then to get the best out of them.
Yeah, I think with the Conway one, and like you say, I think he would openly admit that he views himself as a number nine.
A nine,
I
yeah.
think I think Borough have missed his energy as the central nine, and I think that's something that it's probably a case of Middlesbrough are perhaps not playing into Tommy Conway's strengths at the moment. And I don't think he's particularly performed badly as such. I just think we're not seeing Tommy Conway for exactly what we've kind of grown to know him as Borough's number nine, really. Not really got too many opportunities to run in behind. I mean, we saw prime example the goal against Sheffield United. That was Tommy Conway at his best, running off the back of a centre half. It's a great ball from target, I'm really confident whenever Tommy Conway goes through on goal that he's going to make a keeper work or put the ball in the back of the net, really. And I think Borough have missed that, and what Rob Edwards is so keen to talk about all the time is the intensity and the intense running, really, not just the pressing. And I think, look, again, I don't want to come across as though I'm saying that we've been dreadful. It was Borough's probably worst performance of the season against Portsmouth, but it's not just solely down to Conway or the attackers not settling in. As you say, I think a large part of where Borough have looked at their best for me this season, and I think probably quite nicely ties in with when Tommy Conway's looked his best this season, is Norwich away and probably Sheffield United at
Yeah.
home.
Yeah.
And both of those, funnily enough, are games in which Tommy Conway started as the nine. So I think with the addition of Strelect, I think, as you've touched on, and as everyone has, there's some really, really exciting signs. But I think even from when BBC T spoke to Slovakian journalists, it's very much been a case of, and Rob Edwards as well has touched on it, he can play in a variety of roles. But I think where everyone wants to see him and really where we haven't yet seen him is that position kind of right to where Conway has been playing in that little pocket where, as you say, he got that shot off against Stoke. I think with that, Rob Edwards might well argue that his hands are tied a little bit because I think it's quite apparent that Strelec is probably not quite up to the speed of the championship just yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And I think the other thing is, if the fact that Edwards has played Strelic as a nine so far suggests that he sees him as a stronger nine. He thinks his qualities are better brought out as a nine than as a number 10. I think you might have to get the stage then that yeah, ideally you'd like to get Conway and Strelic into the team, but if you can't, choose between them. You've got to choose between them, and that's tough. But it's not like you're short of number 10 players. Nipan's there. Sen can play both. We've seen that, although I do think he's better as a nine.
Yeah,
Hansen, I thought, was good from the bench against Stoke. And I know he's had a rough time, but there is a player in Morgan Whittaker. If you can get that, if you can get Morgan Whittaker rolling, then he can be a game changer in this division. He's had a difficult start to the season, but I remember talking to Whittaker at Mansfield in pre-season, and him saying like he almost felt like this was the start of his Borough career. Really, we won't go over it all again, but difficult when he came in, difficult timing for him to come in. I thought in pre-season he was really good, and it's been a shame that how the season started for him. But you might get to the point, and we don't know this yet because we haven't seen Strelec in one of those deeper roles. He might well play there, like you say. It might be that Edwards likes him there, but just thinks he's not quite where I want him to be conditioning wise yet. Which is why I'm playing Conway there and Strelec there. I think that'll become clearer after the break, because I think the other thing is being kind of match fit and being Edwards match fit are two very
yeah,
different things, really. A couple of players have said to me in interviews so far this season that they feel physically as good as they've felt in a long time. Clearly, that side of the game, the conditioning, the running, as you touched on, is a massive part of Edwards' game. So that'll become clear in the coming weeks as to whether Strelic could play there. But if he doesn't, if Edwards continues to see him as a nine, then you might have to just choose between them. It might be a horses for courses, which is fine. I think, given what I was saying there about Edwards' demands, the playing demands, he's talked openly this season about when he's looked at the stats and he's been hugely impressed by what he's seen, not just from what he wants to see, but when he's then compared it with the running numbers from the rest of the championship. I think what we have to consider there is, and Edwards has said this himself, if we expect those same players to do that week in, week out, they'll break is the word he's used. So rotation, or however you want to put it, is going to be an important part of Edwards' management this season. So it might well be that. I think this next chunk of games, when we're a couple of weeks freshen up, kind of go again, and this next chunk of games will tell us a lot more. I hope, but I also think it will, about how Edwards sees that front three going forward and how it'll play out. And also, will he stick with the three at the back and wing backs? Because he's said repeatedly, hasn't he? I am not wedded to a system. I'll play whatever I think is the best way to get the best out of the tools at my disposal. So the squad he's got now is different to the squad he had when he started pre-season. Christ almighty, it's transformed from the squad he has at the start of the pre-season, isn't it? So it might be now that he thinks, right, now's the time to move to a back four. Now's the time to change the structure and the makeup of the attack. It'll be interesting to see, I think, won't it, those first couple of games out of the break.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, tying in a couple of questions we put out last night on the socials about just anything that people would like us to discuss, or any topics, any questions, and just you touching on formation, there was quite a few people, different ones, basically just saying, do you think that it is just a five, and it's, as much as he says, I'm not kind of set on a five and will not change that, do you think there is a genuine chance that Boro will change shape? And to that, I think there probably is. And I know he's now admitted it, and I think it was his last pre-match media, that actually when he first come into the club, his idea of what Middlesbrough were going to look like was actually as a four. And I think, again, going back to the positivity and the benefit of the type of recruitment the club did over the summer, you've got Callum Britton there that's absolutely comfortable in a four. You've got Matt Targett that's also there and comfortable in a four. In terms of midfield options, I actually thought Alan Brown was one of our best players against Stoke, and yet he finds himself back on the bench at Portsmouth. I think if you were to move to a three, that certainly benefits him. Quite interestingly, there was a question in from Paul Newton, and basically said, in terms of the benefits and the drawbacks, or what might be in Rob Edwards' thinking in terms of, do we go to a four now, or is it the right time? In terms of what you're going to lose and what you're going to gain from changing shape, a lot of people, other podcasts, other Boro fans on social media, and as we've even touched on, the five has made Boro look so good defensively. Very rarely do you feel, even in the games where they've narrowly won it at the beginning of the season, they never really felt under massive pressure, even in the last sort of 10 minutes of games where you're usually biting your fingernails off. In terms of moving from a four to a five, what are some of the, I guess, talking points and potential, I guess, positives from that? Because for me, as soon as I think of the differences between a four and a five, and we've spoken about the forward line, I think the actual sort of attacking lineup and the positions within that is an interesting one, because when Borough moved to a four, well, I say moved to a four, they actually initially moved to a four against Southampton, but then when we
Mm.
saw the four against Stoke start, it was quite interesting that Edwards didn't perhaps opt to go with two more natural sort of wide players in the form of a Hansen. It was still a very narrow three in the sense of Conway and then Nipan. And I felt in the second half, when they were matched by Stoke, that was quite quickly exposed. It was only until you then added Hansen back into the mix and gave Borough a bit of more natural width, where that looked something sustainable that could maybe move going forwards, if they were going to play against fours, that is.
Yeah, I think the beauty of going to a four, as you said at the start there, is your wing backs now are just as comfortable, if not potentially more comfortable,
Yeah.
playing as a four. Matt Targett's played more as a left back than a left wing back, and Callum Britton has as well. Now they are more than comfortable doing both, and I think we're already now seeing the rewards, or potentially going to see the rewards of why Boro signed players who were comfortable playing in slightly different roles. So that's going to be seamless. Centre halves, you're fine. I think Ayling is at his best now as a right-sided centre back in a three, but what we've seen of him in the early weeks of the season is he'll be fine as the right back in a four. I think, and Ayling admitted this himself in the interview I did with him after what game will it have been, West Brom maybe, that he hasn't got the legs now, he says, to play in that role as a right wing back where he's up and down constantly, or even as a right back. Maybe there's not as much demand in a 4-3-3, say, but you still need to get forward and join the attack. The midfielding dynamic's interesting because, like you say, it gives you the chance. If you're going to a three in there, gives you the chance to play Brown. I thought Brown was good, like you say, against Stoke, but it also gives you the chance to maybe play Morris in the deeper, and then Hackney and Nepan
Yeah.
as the midfielder. Nepan is as comfortable as an 8, playing as an 8 as he is a 10. I know this is down the line, but McGree as a three to the left of Hackney, say. I know we've only seen really McGree playing as a left-sided attacker or infrequently a number 10. But he has played as a midfielder before. He's got the legs to play as a midfielder. You need to get him fit first, clearly. So you've got the options there. But I completely agree with you. I think if you're gonna do that, then you're attacking three. You don't want it to be quite as narrow as it has been, and that is where you might benefit from a Hansen, a Sen,
Even a Whitaker, really.
a
I
Whitaker,
mean, off the right.
potentially even a Bergzorg. I mean, he's way down the pecking order clearly, but yeah. So there are options there. I think, as I said there at the start, the fact that Borough brought in players who were who were so comfortable in doing both, is now going to benefit Borough. And as you said, all the indications early in the summer, all the indications I had early in the summer was that Edwards was actually leaning towards a four. And when we went to Mansfield for that first pre-season friendly, and I missed a couple after that because I was away, but that first game, when the team news dropped, I can't remember the makeup of the defence, but I thought Vandenberg must be playing right back because I was convinced Borough were going to play a four, and he didn't. Vandenberg played as a three. As I say, apologies, I can't remember who was in there with him and who played the wing backs role. It was the first we saw of Silvera as a left wing back, and then they've gone forward from there, really. But I suspect Edwards might well judge it as a horses for courses.
Yeah.
Look at each game individually and think what's the best approach to suit this game, and it'll become increasingly clear, I think, which shape, which formation, which setup looks the most balanced, both in terms of defense and attack, which is clearly going to be the priority in the next chunk of games.
Yeah, you did touch on him there. Another question coming on Instagram from James. Could Riley McGree returning soon, dot, 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 maybe, dot, 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 hopefully, dot, 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 help our attacking chemistry? I think that's undoubtedly a yes, but I think, as you say, it's getting Riley McGree to a position where he can play a half of football as a start point. It's been, do you know what? Funnily enough, I was speaking to Nathan about this the other day, and I honestly now can't think. Again, probably poor research. I should maybe have went and checked, but I can't remember the last 45 minutes of football that Riley McGree even played for Middlesbrough. But it's so difficult because I'm one of those that even throughout the injuries, Riley McGree for me, I think even still now, and it's quite a big statement, as you say, given how many options that we've got, a fully fit Riley McGree still is a starter for Middlesbrough. But it's just a case of getting him there. I mean, I know obviously you do the presses, and it must be a bit of an awkward one for yourself, Craig, all the other journalists sat there pretty much, because Borough have done okay with injuries up until this point. I know centre back's been a bit of a problem, but every week it's a case of how's Riley doing? Is he a little bit closer? From everything that Rob Edwards has had to say, and also just your opinion of where he might fit in, do you think the next sort of batch of games might come too soon for Riley McGree, or do you think we could begin to maybe see him make the bench, or at least perhaps do what Dieng did over the weekend and play in some reserve games?
Yeah, the fact he hasn't, I mean, he's clearly not there yet, but all the suggestions over the last couple of weeks have been that he's heading in the right direction. And I absolutely think that Boro have taken the right approach with him. I mean, they're in a position where they're able to, aren't they? So,
Yeah,
like Dale Fry, for example, if you had Darrell Lenihan, George Edmondson, and if Adil Malanda was already here, would you have started Dale Fry at Portsmouth, or would you have said, well, actually, it makes sense here to give him a fortnight, to give him 2 more weeks? Although the indications were that they'd actually treaded as carefully as they could, and he could have maybe made it the week earlier, but Borough were very careful, obviously, and didn't want to rush him back. I mean, Edwards has said it every week, hasn't he? To the point where he's almost getting like apologetic when he's saying it. We want him to get back, and we want him to stay back. There's clearly been, after he got the injury at Bradford, there's clearly been a sit down agreement. Right, we need to make sure this is the last time this happens.
yeah,
So if that means being out for 4 months instead of 6 weeks, or 4 months instead of a couple of months, but then you're back for the rest of the season and you're as strong and ready to go for the rest of the season, then so be it. And the beauty there is, for all the reasons we've just discussed, Borough are pretty well stocked in that attacking area, aren't they? They haven't needed to rush McGree back. But I completely agree with you there when you started this. Even now, with all the strengthening Borough have done in their attack, McGree still feels like he offers something different, doesn't he? He still feels like the one who can thread a needle, find that pass, pick the hole when teams, especially when teams are in that low block, like we've seen, like Portsmouth in the second half, for example, on Saturday. I think McGree's capable of that moment, isn't he? I mean, his goals as well, is
yeah.
the various goals from distance that he scored. Birmingham, was it Birmingham? Norwich certainly springs to mind. Did he score a belter at Birmingham?
Yeah, Birmingham.
1-0 win.
Thinking that, strangely enough, again, I think we touched on it last podcast, but when Borough, for a spell of 4 or 5 games, did actually go into a back five under Michael Carrick and put a little run together, I think,
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. He definitely scored a good goal at St Andrews.
Yeah, so it does feel like he could offer something different. On a personal level, you're just desperate for him to get back now, aren't you? Because that injury he got in the summer at Bradford must have been his most frustrating of the lot, because Carrick said, didn't he, at the end of last year, but we're trying to get to the bottom of it now. We're trying to figure out. We think we're through the. We think we've brought the back of it. We think we're through the worst of it. And then he comes back and starts under a new head coach with another injury setback. You've just got to hope that when he comes back, and I think that when he comes back and plays, it's probably 2 or 3 weeks at least after when he could have come back and played.
Yeah.
I think Borough are going to be as careful as they can be with him, and just hope then that's the start for him. That's the start of almost phase two of his Borough career, I guess.
Yeah. I think what's interesting as well is a lot of Middlesbrough fans, especially a very kind of, I don't want to say a vocal minority, but you do see the comments whenever that Australia squad gets announced. Oh, is McGree fit again? The thing is, the timing of this season, especially if Borough can get Riley McGree fit enough to begin to be involved again, it's only going to benefit them because there's a World Cup at the end of the season that Riley McGree will absolutely be aiming to be a part of. And you'd like to think, like, countless other players in the Championship and in the Premier League, that he's thinking of a World Cup in America and thinking, well, basically, I just need to be the best of however many other attackers or midfielders from my country and basically give myself the best shot of getting there because as we've touched on, Riley McGree, he's such a probably falls into the same category of Nipan, I guess, where those type of players, I feel Borough probably going back to Portsmouth were a little bit unstuck against Portsmouth. The fact that And going back even further to the Preston game, I think there's always going to have to be, and at the moment it's going to be Nipan, one of those sort of number 10 that can also play number 8
Mm.
in that three to make the system work, at least in an attacking sense, because they lacked. Hansen had a few good turns and a few decent runs. Sen, I've been really impressed with him, especially his sort of tracking back and his pressing ability. As I say, Tommy Conway not especially bad, but there seems to be a real missing link between midfield and attack whenever Nipan doesn't play. And I think it's interesting with players like that going forward. And a lot of questions have been not only about individuals and the formation, but what is actually the reason for this kind of Borough not being able to create many chances. And I do think, for me personally, I guess this is just more personal opinion, that for me, Nipan's just got to play. When he's available, I think he's just one of those. He might not do anything for 60 minutes, but he will just produce a moment like he did against Preston.
Yeah, I mean, he made such a difference at Preston, didn't he? And I agree. I think it's Nipan and two others. He's
Yeah.
been. We haven't seen him as an 8 yet, but I don't think we will unless Edwards moves to a 3. But then even then, it feels like the 3 will be Brown, Hackney, and Morris. And Nipan could potentially be used there at some point. But yeah, I agree with you. He feels like one of those players where even when he has an off day, and he did against Stoke, didn't he, last week?
Yeah.
Yeah, he had an off day there. But even when he had an off day, you think he's always capable of a moment. He's always capable of finding that moment. And the other thing I think with Nipan importantly is even when he has an off day, you're not carrying him. It's not like this is a player who'll trudge around and do nothing and then suddenly come up with a moment of magic 10 minutes from time. I can't remember who his debut was against now, but Edwards afterwards and Kieran Scott in his interview with BBC Tees, I think it was afterwards, was saying they loved how he was there in his own box, crunching into a tackle or making a block and celebrating with the defender. So this is a player who, even when it's not falling for him, not happening for him in an attacking sense, he's still wholly committed to making the unit work, isn't he? I agree with you. I think Nipan. I don't think you can play him every single week just because of the demands of what I was saying there.
Yeah.
But physically, if he's fine, if he's not in need of a breather at any point, I think he's in your first choice 11 undoubtedly. And it's still really early days, really early days. How good's he going to be 4 or 5 weeks down the line? I do also think though that you kind of. I don't think no one's disagreeing with this. By the way, I haven't seen an uproar over the weekend on social media or anything like that. But it's also the need for perspective, isn't there? Yes, there's clearly an area in the attack that needs to improve. But what it's nice to work on addressing an issue from a position of strength.
Yeah.
Or a second in the table. They've suffered one defeat so far this season. Even going into that, yeah, they only scored once in 2 games, but they drew with a good Stoke team and a Southampton team that bit indifferent, but you only have to look at the quality there to see the quality in the squad. Like neither are disastrous results. The Portsmouth one was a bad result. Going into that, I thought even a draw, you're probably going to be slightly disappointed. You want to win that game, but you don't. Nobody's got. Nobody. Everyone knows you don't need to rip it up and start again. Hopefully, it's tweaks, and improvements. And I think Edwards will have always accepted that it wasn't going to be glorious. It wasn't going to be perfect at both ends straight away. To improve at one end, you probably have to take a bit of pain at the other. And now the next challenge is finding the right balance with both, improving the attacking output, but ensuring you maintain that defensive solidity.
Yeah, I think, like you say, perspective is a really interesting one because ultimately, if anyone, like going in off the back of the transfer window closing when we last spoke, if anyone had said, even at that point, I'm not even referring to the beginning of the season, Borough will go into the next international break and they'll still be in the top two, I think all of the supporters would have said, we're still in dreamland a little bit here. None of us really saw this coming. Do you think I think it was put to Rob Edwards slightly, and of course, publicly before a game, it's quite a difficult question for him to come out and give a really honest answer. But do you think, both from your own perspective, from Edwards's perspective, do you think he will be viewing this, perhaps behind the scenes more so than publicly, as Boro are actually a little bit kind of ahead of schedule anyway in terms of what he was actually expecting?
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah. I don't think that. I think he'll have thought they were capable of it. Going back to the start of the season, I never really understood the whole like predictions that Borough were going to finish 16th, 17th, 18th. We won't get into all that again, but Michael Carrick was sacked for ultimately falling short with a team that finished 10th and that was expected to challenge for the top six. Now, clearly, across the season, last season, issues and vulnerabilities and areas for improvement were emerged, and those needed fixing. And you lost players like Ben Doak and Emmanuel Latelat. But even before the players came in, you could see, I think, that the basis was there. And then the squad, the summer transfer window, I think, has been hugely impressive. So I think, but the season had already started. I think before a ball was kicked, had you said to Edwards, you'll be in the top 10 at the second international break, possibly maybe the top 8, top 6, absolutely snapped your hand off. But to be in the top 2 at this stage, bearing in mind how poor Borough have started in the last couple of seasons and how damaging that start has been, I think
Yeah,
it's worth reminding ourselves that Borough aren't playing catch up now like they have been the last couple of years. And those starts in the last couple of years have ultimately cost Borough a place in the top 6. The dynamic of the league feels different this season, doesn't it? You're not going to get 2 teams reaching 100 points. Even in the second international break, there's still question marks about the teams that came down and how they're gonna fare this year. Ipswich seem to be finding the feet. Leicester are going pretty well now. Southampton, I'm still not sure. But when you look at the table, I like the look of Coventry.
yeah,
Beyond that, and I know it's really, really early, you'd be hard pressed to say, well, I really, really fancy them to stick around in the top 6, or I really fancy them to stick around in the top 6. Clearly, people think that about Borough as well, and it's too early to truly know for Borough. But there's nothing to fear, I don't think, or there's very little to fear. And I think, like Edwards, that the only sounds ridiculous considering the second, but the only way is up for Borough in that I think they're only going to get better. They're only going to improve, and this attacking output, the attacking formula, the best way to get the best out of the attacking players. I think Edwards can only get closer to finding the right formula as the season goes on. So yeah, that defeat at Portsmouth, frustrating defeat at Portsmouth, but still an awful lot to be encouraged about.
yeah, absolutely. I was just, I mean, you did sort of touch on it there. I was just going to say, in terms of, games, I suppose, given Sunderland are in the Premier League now, you probably haven't seen as much as what you may have previously from other teams. But what have you made of the Championship so far? Because I think you did briefly mention it there. It still feels, I know Ipswich are beginning to put a little bit of a run together, and we've seen Southampton, off the back of their result against Middlesbrough, funnily enough, begin to put a few performances together. But it still feels, and it again, like you also mentioned, it's very early, but this division isn't quite kind of what I was expecting. I think just from the sheer amount of money that Ipswich spent, Southampton as well, I was expecting something very different. And I don't think it would be anything crazy if the pair of them go and put 10 wins at a time together and fly up the league table. But as you say, it does feel, at least after 9 games, which is incredibly early, that the division perhaps actually is going to be a little bit more open. Even Coventry, they've been excellent and they've scored bucket loads of goals, but I think they're currently only sitting a point above Middlesbrough, and everyone's saying how fantastic Coventry are. So it's a really interesting one for me this season, this division.
Yeah, I'm just looking now. 7 points separate second place Boro and 17th place Southampton, which just sums it up really. But I agree with you. You know, even at this early stage, you wouldn't have had Preston fourth, Stoke fifth, and QPR sixth. You wouldn't have had Birmingham 16th, Southampton 17th, Wrexham 18th, Norwich 19th, and you certainly wouldn't have had Sheffield United 24th. And I think the other crucial point, remember when the fixtures came out and Opta decided that Boro's first 6 games were I think it was first 6, wasn't it? It was the most difficult opening spell in the championship. Well, if you look at the championship table, Boro have played the teams that are fourth, fifth, seventh, and eighth so far in the first 9 games of the season. So it's not like Boro have had a kind start. I've done a few Sunderland pods, and for all that they're clearly excited about how Sunderland have started, there's this caveat of have Sunderland had an easy start? Have Sunderland, what happens when you face the tough challenges? Well, Borough haven't faced some of the sides that are right up there yet, and they haven't faced some of the sides that you would expect to be right up there at the end of the season. But they haven't had an easy ride at the start of the season, have they? They've played some good sides, and they'll face another one. I know Ipswich are only ninth, but I think that's a tough game when they come back as well. I actually think it's a good game for Borough. I think the timing of the game, the opponent, and the fact it's a Friday night as well, when there'll be that sense of occasion, big game feel, I think that'll all benefit Borough. But yeah, I agree with you. Fascinating. I mean, it always is, isn't it? It's class the champ. I love the championship.
Yeah.
Um, but it, it always leaves you guessing. Like Preston, Stoke, QPR, can they stick around? Sheffield, they're going to pull the finger out, aren't they? But then you think, well, actually, we're 9 games in now. So yeah, I know I've said it a few times for different reasons. I think this next spell of games, because that first chunk is the first chunk of games. Then even the second chunk, managers are still getting to grips with having the squad in place after the closure of the transfer window. This now feels like the first chunk where everything's just settled down. I think this next spell will probably be the most revealing of the mini chunks so far this season.
Yeah, I think everyone always talks about that magic sort of 10 game mark. So the fact that we're going to hit that 10 game mark, at least from league games during this period, is a really interesting one. I think it was Mowbray that always used to kind of famously say you're basically not allowed to look at the table until 10 games. But yeah, just on Ipswich, not kind of previewing the game at all. There's still plenty of time in the international break, unfortunately. Like we touched on, again, there's another international break, even though it's the same every season. But in terms of just something that's kind of just popped into my head, really, as we were discussing Ipswich, Chuba Akpom's a funny one because I watched the Norwich Ipswich game. He gets what 10 minutes at the end of that game, and from obviously your perspective in terms of covering Middlesbrough and the story that Scott broke, that Middlesbrough were, at one stage or another quite fairly advanced, so at least they thought they were in terms of bringing him back. It's a strange situation because you look at Middlesbrough now and everything that went with that sort of that mad 48 hours of Chuba Akpom potentially returning. I mean, from your side and obviously looking at Akpom now, do you think that Chuba Akpom might be looking at this fixture and potentially, I don't know, starting on the bench? I don't want to curse him or anything, thinking what might have been. And also, was there ever, you know, there was a lot of skepticism about the Akpom links. I think mainly because of the kind of, I, I guess the fact that it just come out of nowhere. How close did Chuba Akpom come to returning to Middlesbrough? And also, I guess, yeah, like how does that look now? I suppose from Borough's perspective and Akpom's perspective.
Well, as Scott reported at the time, and I was actually on my honeymoon at the time, and so you've obviously kind of like half drifted out from it. You're looking in. Sorry, the kids have come in downstairs here, and I can hear the chaos already. They've only been in 2 minutes. So you kind of, what it's like when you're on holiday. You're kind of half looking, aren't you? But only half looking. And then when that Akpom stuff came out at the time, it was as much a shock to me as I think it was probably anyone. but Boro were, absolutely in for Chuba Akpom at the time. It went back a couple of months when it became clear that Akpom was going to be available this summer, and Akpom's representatives, I think, first made it known that he wanted to move to the Premier League. Then it became clear he wasn't going to get a Premier League move. Then I think there was interest from Saudi, but for personal reasons, don't think his family were interested in going to Saudi. So that was a no-go. So then obviously you look at the Championship. Now, ultimately, what the word was from Akpom's end at the time was that Akpom wanted to join the club where he felt he had the best chance to get back to the Premier League. Obviously, Boro were involved initially at the start of that mad week when Birmingham and Ipswich were, well, when it looked like he was going to Birmingham, didn't it? That looked like being done. He'd gone and spoken to Birmingham, just about wrapped it up. Then Ipswich came in at the last minute, and he clearly felt that Ipswich was going to be his best route back to the Premier League. I just wonder whether Akpom, given the way Akpom's career has played out, I just wonder whether Akpom would have been better served. And it's easy for me to say this. I'm clearly not in that position and not at the stage of his career. I wonder whether Akpom would have been better served thinking, right, rather than what I can understand why I did think this, but rather than what's the best way for me to get back to the Premier League, what's the best way for me to play my best football again? Which is what Ryan Giles should have done, by the way. But again, I understand why he went to Luton that time. It's a Premier League move, the financial riches that come with it. Completely get it. But Giles, if you sat down with him now, would undoubtedly say he should have signed for Boro that summer, and things might have turned out differently. Again, no one can begrudge Chuba Akpom for signing for Ajax. It's Ajax.
Yeah.
A player who a year earlier was on the scrappy, but Boro really, wasn't he? He came back in from the cold. But I just wonder whether Akpom would have been better off thinking, what's going to be the best way to get me playing again. I don't think it's a bad thing that Boro have missed out on Akpom, because for all we talked in the first 20 minutes, half an hour or so there about the kind of search to get the best out of the attack, I haven't seen one fan suggest that the reason the attack isn't firing is because there isn't enough quality there or Boro don't have the players. I think Boro have got a bit of everything in that forward line, from Strelic to Conway to Sen to Riley McGree, who we've talked about, Nipan there, Whittaker, Bergzorg, Hansen, Hellfire. You're not short of attacking players there. But if Akpom did sign for Ipswich, as we're told, thinking that's his best route back to the Premier League, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes at Ipswich. But you wonder whether he's looking at it now, thinking, actually, I was deliberating between Ipswich and Birmingham. Well, Birmingham are in the bottom half, and like Wrexham have maybe found the jump to the Championship slightly more challenging than they expected. Ipswich have done that thing that relegated teams sometimes do, where they've found it hard to get out of the losing habit, I think. And maybe the behind-the-scenes adjustment of having a completely different dressing room to what they had last time they won promotion. Middlesbrough, perhaps from the outside looking in, and the thought at the time in the club in the summer was always that, well, you might think Ipswich and Birmingham are better placed than we are, but we certainly don't. And it's very, very early days. But as things stand now, Boro are best placed out of those three teams. Don't think he's scored yet, has he? I was just looking.
No, I don't think so.
One assist, 2 starts. I mean, it's set up, innit? You know for a fact it's set up for that Friday night.
I didn't know whether to ask about it, to be honest. It just popped into my head, and I thought, you know what? Actually, it's one that I guess obviously the talk will ramp up as we get closer to the game, but it's a little arm to the narrative of, adding to, like you say, when Boro return to action, Friday night game, live on Sky, first game back from the international break, and then you just think there's a very strong chance that Akpom, I'm sure he'll get on the pitch, but he probably won't start the game.
No, and if he does get on the pitch, if he does start, despite the fact that he chose not to come back to Boro in the summer, he'll get a great reception, won't he? And so he should, I think, for his role in one of the most memorable and enjoyable seasons for a long time. Boro were great that season, weren't they? They were great to watch. For a chunk of that second half of the season, they were undoubtedly the best team in the Championship. They should have gone up, They made a mess of it later on, ran out of steam. However you want to look at it, they should have gone up that year. I think they were the best team in the playoffs. I think they should have won the playoffs, but Mark Robbins obviously did a number on Carrick. But yeah, that by a million miles has been Akpom's standout season in his career. Like he might well prove me wrong here. I don't think he'll ever repeat that. I don't think he'll ever find that run of form again. The other interesting strand, of course, is Hayden Hackney. And
yeah, of course.
there's another one, we're talking about Akpom there. Did he make the right decision? Did he make the wrong decision? Well, I don't think there'll be an ounce of Hackney now thinking, you know what, maybe I should have signed for Ipswich in the summer. There's a player who I think, I felt it at the time, and I think it's clear now. And again, let's see how the season plays out. But as we're talking now, that looks like being a good decision from Hackney, doesn't it, to stay put rather than join Ipswich?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really exciting prospect. But just in terms of, again, I think I asked you something similar last time that you were on. But in terms of since Rob Edwards' arrival, obviously this second chunk of games, I know you and Scott have had the chance. Of course, you obviously go and speak to Rob Edwards a couple of times a week for the pressers. But in terms of the, I guess, well, 2-on-1 time that you had with him on the You Are My Borough podcast, did you see at all? I know he's still public facing, and obviously he's fully aware of it's going out on YouTube to thousands of people that are going to watch it. Did you see a little bit of a different side to him, more of a personal side? I'm sure, obviously, you're still very much, in terms of the industry that you work in, enjoying that he's so open and the kind of character that he is.
Yeah, you know what? On that pod, I didn't see a different side to him, and I think that's a compliment, because I think he has just been himself in every environment since he's come in. And I've spoken to people behind the scenes at Boro since he's come in, and asked, as you inevitably do, what's he like then? What are things like? What's he like? And a couple of times from different people in different roles, I've been told, well, what you see is what we see. He's very much being himself. I'm told there's a real ruthless and steely side when there has to be, which you'd expect of someone who's managed in the Premier League. But I think what we see when we're sat there, and what you see when you're watching press conferences or listening to him on the radio, I think he's just very human, really. And Mark Drury made the point. I was talking to Mark last week for the pod we do, and Mark made the point where he's come away from interviews kind of feeling refreshed by the fact that Edwards has seen the game that Mark's seen. And because the amount of times with Carrick last season, but with managers, with various managers, you'll get a feel of a game, and then a manager will come in a press conference and clearly try and put a spin on it, and you find yourself doubting yourself. Have I been overly critical there? Maybe have I gone in with a view that I've let affect my judgment of the game? I don't think there's been any games so far where Edwards has come in and kind of tried to put a completely different spin on things. He hasn't had to, has he? Because results have been good. He slaughtered them after Doncaster. Clearly, if you're getting beat every week, you can't do that. But I think he thought, and he was proved right, wasn't it, that a blast was needed then. But I just think the personal and the human side is great. I think Edwards has been clever in that. I think he's been aware that he's come in and there was a disconnect between the fans and the side at the end of last season, which there was. And it's clear right from the very start. And he's talked to the players about this. He's talked openly about it. It's not like it's a secret mission. He's talked openly about the fact we need to build that bond again. And he's done it in various different ways. And I know we clearly benefit, but a manager going on a pod like that, not loads of them do it.
Yeah.
Like Kieran Scott going on and speaking to Mark for an hour long live Q&A effectively.
There's one thing kind of doing it like we're doing now, but live as well is.
Yeah, and there aren't many directors of football, head of football, sporting directors, whatever title. There aren't many who do that. That transparency helps. Edwards' communication's been great. I think the club have done a great job. Dan at the club, who does the social media, and it's gives us the little snippets with the questions with the players and all. I think all that's class, because it just helps to kind of, I think, see the players as blokes,
Humans,
as
yeah.
human, as the personal side. And like Edward says this, doesn't he? You can say and do all of that. If you're losing on a Saturday, it doesn't make a world of difference. But when you are winning, that helps. That undoubtedly helps. It undoubtedly helps to build the togetherness, to build the buzz, to build that feeling of unity, and that can be a powerful thing. That togetherness and belief and momentum, as we talk about, like that can be a powerful thing. I think off the pitch, Edwards has clearly done an awful lot right on the pitch. I think off the pitch, he's been great. I mean, that Higgy video, for example, when they got Higgy in and did that was
Yeah.
really good, wasn't it? Yeah, I think off the pitch, he's been class.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, after nearly an hour of talking about Middlesbrough, I'm pretty gutted that I've now got to go back and think what football's next and then realise it's watching England on Thursday. But it's fine. I admit on this podcast, every international break, I am the biggest fair weather international England fan ever.
Yeah,
So
I'm the same, mate. I'm the same, to be fair. So no complaints here.
yeah, I mean, as I say, I wish after that nearly an hour of talking about Middlesbrough, we could have a night under the light at the Riverside to look forward to in a couple of days' time. But unfortunately, we've got a little bit longer than that to wait. But we'll leave it there, Dom. Obviously, a massive thank you again for coming on and giving up an hour of your time during the day. I know there was that many comments on the last pod that we recorded, and I mean, especially going back to that quote from the beginning, when Dom Shaw talks, you listen. I don't know if you want that tattooed on you, or maybe get it on the wall behind you for when you're doing a podcast in the future.
New bio on X and Blue Sky and the rest of it.
Yeah, but no, a massive thank you again, and obviously for everyone. I know I said this the last time. I'm sure you all tune into You Are My Borough, but if you don't already, I'm sure you know where Dom is on all socials. But by all means, check out the interview that yourself and Scott done with Rob Edwards. I'm saying this now. Everyone who's probably tuning in at this has watched it. So a plug anyway, Dom. As a thank you for coming on. But yeah, for anyone that's watched this video and enjoyed, please do subscribe. As I said the last time, you can subscribe to both channels. That's absolutely fine. And yeah, thanks once again. And that has been another episode of the Boropolis podcast.